Hello and welcome back to the Wandering Cantos. Today we're going to be continuing our series on the Quintessential Quintuplets, and we will be doing our third part on Volume 4. This one will be covering the last three chapters, so if you haven't seen my previous videos on Volume 4 Part 1 and Part 2, I recommend that you check them out now since we'll sort of be continuing our discussion that we started in those. If you like this type of content and want to be notified when the next episode is released, please consider subscribing to the channel. And if you're new here, the purpose of this video is to treat this manga the same way you would treat a literary classic in a high school or college English class. Basically, that means we are going to take a look at the plot of each chapter, do a little character analysis, and then study things like theme. As always, I like to give a little bit of a spoiler warning, so this episode will include spoilers for Volume 1 through 4, but we won't be spoiling anything from future volumes or the anime, for example. And as I mentioned earlier, this video will be focused on the last three chapters of Volume 4, so those are chapters 30 through 32. So, we begin with Chapter 30, The Binding Legend, Day 3, Part 2. So we start chapter 30 off by getting a flashback to 2 hours earlier from the previous events. Itsuki and Ichika talk about Futaro, and Itsuki expresses her fear that Futaro may be like their father, and this is sort of why she feels this need to investigate him and make sure that he's actually good intentioned. Miku tries to talk to Ichika about the dance and suggests that they both dance with Futaro, but Ichika is too sick to talk about things. She tells Futaro and Miku to go look for Itsuki, who is all alone. While Futaro and Miku look for Itsuki, Futaro starts to get more and more sick. It's likely that he caught his cold from Raya and then accidentally gave it to Ichika. The girls realize that Itsuki is missing, and they decide to split up and search for her. Futaro comes to a realization, however, and invites Ichika to help him look for her on the ski lift. It turns out that Ichika is really Itsuki in disguise. It was too embarrassing for her to admit that she was in disguise, so things pretty much quickly got out of hand. Futaro could tell when Ichika didn't call him by his first name, and since she always does that, and he sort of reveals that he knows more about the sisters than they probably think he does. Futaro's understanding of Itsuki's situation and doesn't embarrass her about the whole dress-up situation, but he does, however, pass out from his fever right afterwards. And that brings us to Chapter 31, The Binding Legend, Day 3. Part 3. So, Futaro gets put sort of on lockdown so he can rest while sick. This limits his ability to talk to the Quints, and they feel bad that his trip is going to end on such a lonely, sad note. Futaro is able to tell Nino that Kintaro isn't able to make it to the dance, which she interprets as Kintaro not being interested. Miku and Ichika have a heartfelt conversation by the bonfire. Ichika apologizes for the whole dance situation, though internally she still admits that she has feelings for Futaro. Miku apologizes too, but then reaffirms that she likes Futaro. She tells her sisters to do as they wish, but that she won't lose to them. Yotsuba, meanwhile, looks at Futaro's guide and sees how much he annotated and how excited he was for the trip. She beats herself up for dragging him around while he was sick, but Itsuki points out that he had fun doing all of those things. They find a piece of paper where he's written down things to tell Raya about the trip and realize that he's enjoyed everything he's done with them, including going to the inn and playing games in the car when they're stuck in traffic. Itsuki sneaks into Futaro's room to find him and sort of ask him about the trip, but when she turns on the lights, she realizes that all of the Quints have done the same thing. They realize that all of them were worried about Futaro in their own ways. Itsuki then walks over to Futaro and asks him to tell her more about himself. She holds his hand right as the bonfire dance begins. And if you remember, the binding legend is that, if you're holding hands with the person you're dancing with, you'll be bound together for life. So then we get the final chapter, which is the Binding Legend, Day 2000. So we jump ahead in time to the day of Futuro's wedding. He calls a much older Raya and tells her that he forgot his wedding ring at home. Raya tells her father that she's worried that Futuro will be a bad husband. Raya then arrives at the wedding with the ring, and it seems like the Quince's father hasn't accepted the wedding and didn't plan on coming. There also seems to be something that has gone wrong with the preparations because the staff seem worried about something, but it's all very vague. Raya then leaves to find Futuro and finds him fast asleep. She laments that the wedding day doesn't seem like a big deal to him. Later, Futuro enters the church and sees Maida, I believe it's pronounced. That's the guy who wanted to dance with Ichika. It turns out that he danced with someone else and ended up getting married to her. So again, this is a big flash forward in time. The bride then enters the church, though since she's a Quint, we still can't tell which one she is. We then flash back to the school trip, and it is revealed that all of the girls held one of Futuro's fingers during the dance. Thus, according to the legend, he could be bound to any one of them. So, Volume 4. Who is the bride? At this point, it still feels like any of them could still be the bride. So Miku has openly declared that she likes Futuro. Ichika has more secretly admitted to having feelings for Futuro. Itsuki seems to have gotten over some of her apprehensions regarding Futuro. Yotsuba seems interested in Futuro and has also admitted to liking him, though potentially as a joke. I don't really think it was a joke, but she says it was. Nino right now seems interested in Kintaro, who is Futuro, but it is notable that he chose to wear the good luck bracelet that he gave to Nino, and that she then gave back to Futuro on his wedding day. Yes, it comes from Raya, but it's definitely connected to Nino too. I will say that Miku's declaration of war seems important, since on a meta level, I think it will be sort of hard to write her as trying to win the war, but then losing, since she's sort of the first one to make the move. You know, that means that we're going to have to see Miku fighting for Futuro and then losing to one of her sisters, which, I mean, it may go that way, but I feel like that's going to be sort of difficult to write. That being said, there's also something that just feels so standard romance story about Futuro's time with Itsuki. Futuro was able to figure out that Itsuki was disguised as Ichika, Futuro's understanding of her situation and sort of refusal to embarrass her, then Futuro passing out conveniently on her shoulder, etc. It just all feels very romance-coded. Also, it is notable that while all of the Quints sneak into his room, we see this scene through Itsuki's perspective. And she's also the first one to hold his hand during the Binding Legend dance, even though eventually the rest of the sisters all hold one of his fingers. There were some major character sort of revelations and reveals in the Volume 4, so I think some of the biggest ones were Miku openly confessing her feelings for Futuro. She's, the shyest of the Quints, and so this was sort of like a big deal that she was actually open and fully said it, isn't hiding anymore, isn't sort of implying it. She openly says, I like Futuro. Itsuki revealing that her fear around men is related to some unknown trauma regarding her father feels like a big reveal. Sort of explains a lot of her sort of actions and decisions, prior in the story, and I think it's going to help inform some of her decisions moving forward. And it also lets us know why she's so sort of suspicious of Futuro. Very curious to see more about that, since we don't really know why she's so against a future romance partner being like their father, since while their father seems sort of controlling and a bit scary to Futuro, he also seems very nice to the Quints, since Nino, for example, asks her father to keep Futuro as a tutor, and he sort of is like, well, I can't say no to you, or, if you're saying it, it must be the truth, that kind of thing. So very interested to learn more about that. And then I think one of the other bigger moments was Ichika's sort of inner conflict between being the big sister for her sisters and sort of advocating for herself. Tried to advocate for herself with doing the dance, but then she found out that there was this whole binding legend and then felt horrible about the implications of her actions in regards to Miku. But she does still like Futaro. Also, she's trying to decide if she's going to leave school to pursue her acting career. So all of that is definitely a lot of sort of reveal and growth of that character. I feel like we're starting to understand how Ichika works, and we also sort of understand, if Miku's biggest struggle right now is her shyness, I think Ichika's biggest struggle is sort of the complex of being the oldest sister. And then some final thoughts on Volume 4 as a whole. The wedding scene so far feels a little weird to me. So Futaro is usually so organized and prepared for things. I mean, he annotated his entire school trip guide for Pete's sake, but as a result, it feels really weird that he forgot his wedding ring on the day of his wedding and that he fell asleep at the church. I would say that him forgetting the wedding ring could be indicative of him being really nervous for the wedding, but the fact that he's calm enough to fall asleep sort of contradicts that. In addition to this, Raya confirms that he seems to be way too nonchalant about the whole wedding. She also expresses a fear that he's going to be a bad husband since he's already forgetting things like the wedding ring. I don't know, it just kind of makes me suspicious of the wedding in a way. And I know that on a meta level, Futaro sort of has to be asleep right now since it's sort of implied that all of these flashbacks of all the events when he's in high school are coming to Futaro through this dream. But there's also the characterization of him forgetting the wedding ring, because if he's just asleep at the flashbacks, you could forgive it and say, oh, that doesn't mean anything, but the fact that Raya, who knows him so well, is sort of expressing all this negativity about the wedding is a little weird. That being said, to end on a more positive note, something that I really like about this manga is that it's really, really good at creating heartfelt, feel-good moments. So, usually in other stories when multiple characters are competing for a love interest, they all see each other as enemies and therefore have no real connection. In the Quintessential Quintuplets, however, the competition are all sisters, and so if they aren't having a heartwarming moment with Futaro, they are usually having a heartwarming moment with themselves. So overall, the whole story just feels very warm. The sisters clearly care about each other, but they also care about Futaro. And while that can sometimes cause issues between them, it usually resolves on a good note since ultimately they love each other and sort of through these struggles, they're able to grow their own relationship since they're now having to sort of modify and grow their relationship with this whole extra element and dynamic of love and romance. So it's just one of those where all the characters are super likable and you're kind of cheering on all of the characters, and it just makes, again, for a very warm reading experience. But with that being said, I'm going to wrap up my discussion on Volume 4, so the next one we'll be on Volume 5. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like, and don't forget to subscribe so you can be notified when the episode on Volume 5 comes out. And then I always like to leave some questions for the comments, since one of my favorite parts of this series is having some sort of discussion and conversation. And, I don't really have anyone else to discuss the Quintessential Quintuplets with, so I'm hoping to have some conversation in the comments. So it sounds like Futaro is going to be in the hospital in Volume 5. And what do you guys think that's going to be all about? So far, his fever doesn't seem that severe, so I'm wondering if there's going to be some sort of added twist, or if they're going to use this hospital visit to reveal more about his past or something like that. And then, do you guys get what I mean about the wedding being a bit weird with Futaro's attitude and some of the comments by the staff? It almost feels like it's like a shotgun wedding since the father didn't plan on attending, but I don't think it's going to go that route. So I think something else is up, but I feel like something's up about this wedding. So I'd be curious to hear what you guys think. But with that being said, I'm going to wrap this one up. So take care, and I will see you in the next one.